Good morning. Today's reading is from the 10th chapter of Mark, verses 32 through 45. They were on their way up to Jerusalem, with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished, while those who followed were afraid. Again, he took the 12 aside and told them what was going to happen to him. "We are going up to Jerusalem," he said, "and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise." Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. "Teacher," they said, "we want you to do for us whatever we ask." "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. They replied, "Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory." "You don't know what you are asking," Jesus said. "Can you drink the cup I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with?" "We can," they answered. Jesus said to them, "You will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared." When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." May the Lord bless the reading and the hearing of his word.
So this season of Lent, we've been focusing on conflict, hence the title of the series, Gridlock. And last week, I shared a story that was pretty personal and a lot vulnerable. And thank you to all who've come to me or sent emails to me this week, just weeks of encouragement saying, thank you for sharing that. After the service, I met some folks who that was their first Sunday here, and I'd been that vulnerable. I was like, oh, I don't know how this is going to go. And to my, surprise or delight, they said they enjoyed the sermon, which was like, great. And then as I started writing this sermon, I just felt this pressure. Shoot, now I have to be that vulnerable every single week. Like, where do I go from there, So I'm not going to be that vulnerable today. But I do want to start kind of in the same place. Last week I talked about Cain and Abel and that the conflict between them, and that theme of sibling rivalry just continues all the way through Scripture. You get Isaac and Ishmael and Jacob and Esau and Rachel and Leah and Joseph and his brothers, and it even kind of goes all the way into the New Testament. Jesus' probably most famous parable, the parable of the prodigal son. You have a competition between the prodigal son and his older brother for the love of the father. And what's interesting about all these stories is the way they invert kind of the traditional norms of ancient society. In the ancient world, it was the firstborn son who was the most favored in the family, right? Because the firstborn son was, they were the one who were responsible for all of their siblings. They would carry on the family name and legacy. The firstborn son got the inheritance. They were favored. And yet in all these stories that I just told, God inverts that, and it's the younger son or the younger daughter who gets the greater favor. I like to remind this to my older brother all the time. See, this is just how God works. No, anyway, so it's interesting how this all gets inverted. And so in today's story, we also get a pair of brothers who are fighting about favor, except they've kind of reached an agreement between themselves that they don't need one to be favored over the other as long as the two of them are favored over all the other disciples. Because that's really what they wanted. They came to Jesus and said, hey, we want you to give us whatever we ask, which that's a bold way to, like without knowing what we're going to ask, will you just give it to us? And Jesus says, well, what do you want? And they say, well, we want to sit, when you come into your power, into your glory, we want to sit on your right and your left. Now, the people who sat on the right and left of a king, these were the positions of highest authority and influence in a kingdom, right? Like we still have this phrase today, we talk about someone being our right-hand man, the person upon whom we defend. So it was the person on the right and left were the trusted advisors. They were, in some cases, kind of entrusted to rule, to make decisions, decrees on behalf of the king. And there's countless scriptures in the Bible that actually refer to the Messiah as sitting on the right hand of God the Father. We say this even in our creeds, right? On the third day, he rose from the dead. He ascended into heaven. Where? And he sitteth at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From thence he shall come to judge the quick and the dead, right? Like, I just want you to get a sense of how bold this request was from James and John. They wanted that position of the highest favor and honor. And when the other disciples found out that's what they asked for, they were pretty mad. They were indignant. And they began squabbling and fighting among themselves about who deserved the honor, who should be on first, right? Like where did the favor go? Now, this story has a couple bits of irony to it. First off, it's not the first time that the disciples have been arguing about who's the greatest. If you just go back one chapter, they're walking to Capernaum, Jesus with his disciples, and disciples were bickering along the road. When they got to Capernaum, Jesus asked them, what were you fighting about along the road? And they were too embarrassed to answer him. Why? Because they had been arguing about who was the greatest. And so Jesus told them then that in God's kingdom, being greatest is about being the servant, being the least of all. And to illustrate his point, he took a child and placed the child among them and said, whoever welcomes one of these children in my name welcomes me. If you want to become great, become like this little child. And it's clear the disciples were not listening at all. Because in the next chapter, what do? Little children are trying to come to Jesus, and they push them away. Like they weren't listening to what he said, just about welcoming children, right? And not only that, then they begin to argue again about who is the greatest. But there's a deeper irony at work here too. Not just that the disciples aren't getting the lesson. It's the context of when they fight about who's the greatest. See, in Mark's gospel, on 3 different occasions, Jesus pulls the 12 aside and tells them what's going to happen to him in Jerusalem. That when they arrive in Jerusalem, he's going to be betrayed. He's going to be condemned. He's going to be crucified. And on the third day, rise again. Both times, the disciples argue about who's the greatest. That argument takes place immediately after Jesus predicts his death. Again, they're not listening. They're not understanding the kind of kingdom that Jesus is talking about. Because when Jesus is lifted up, yes, there will be people on his right and his left, but they aren't positions of authority and favor and influence. No, on his right and left would be 2 thieves condemned to die. That's the kingdom that Jesus would inherit. So the disciples just weren't getting it at all. Before we pile on to the disciples, or before we even look at how Jesus responded to them, I just want to acknowledge that what the disciples were arguing about is common. There's something in all of us that needs favor, right? And when I say favor, that craves attention and it wants to be seen and valued and honored. That's a natural feeling for all of us. We desire favor. Just like plants turn their face towards the sun There is something in us that turns our face towards whoever is giving us the attention, love, and honor that we are seeking. It's just intrinsic to who we are. But there's also some piece of us that feels that favor is limited, right? Like when you were a kid, or maybe you've asked kids these questions, you ask them, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite song? Like they have to pick one. They can't all be the favorite. If they're all the favorite, then there is no favor, right? Or like you ever ask a kid, who's your favorite parent, right? Parents, you don't compete to be the favorite. When my son was little, he literally had a list, and it was like a running tally. He had his top 5 people in our family, and he would remind us all the time. Jalen's dad, Papa, was almost always on top. The low point for me was when I was ranked below the fish, Jackie, which I promptly then killed Jackie. No, I'm just joking. Jackie died of natural causes. So, anyways, but there was a sense of like we wanted to compete for the favor of our kids. And then children turn around and ask the question, who's the favorite child? And when the parent says, no, I don't have any favorites, you know what those kids are thinking? Yeah, right. We know who the favorite is, right? Like there's something intrinsic in each of us that needs to know if we're favored, if we're loved. And this drive for favor, especially when we sense that favor is limited and scarce, it produces in us a handful of drives. The first is competition, right? To gain favor, we have to be smarter, stronger, faster, prettier, more popular, more funny, more cunning, more kind. Like we have this sense of like we have to compete to gain that favor. And then that competition leads naturally into comparison. Am I smarter? Am I funnier? Am I whatever? And we aren't just competing or comparing ourselves to others like for our abilities, but we also compare the amount of favor we each are getting. I have 2 dogs, and if I pet one of them and the other isn't getting the same level of attention, the other dog goes nuts. They whine, they howl, like they'll jump up and they'll nuzzle their face in because they're competing, they're comparing. We are finely tuned, every single one of us. I don't know, it's part of creation. We are finely tuned to notice who's getting more favor and to desire to get that more favor. And if we're not careful, we can allow this competition and comparison and drive for favor to even lead to entitlement. Because historically, there are groups, people who, according to customs, according to laws, become favored, who receive gifts and advantages that others do not. We call this privilege. And I'm not saying privilege is bad any more than favor in and of itself is bad. We all receive privilege. We all receive the gift of wisdom and strength and legacy and inheritance from those who come before. The question always is, what do we do with the privilege we've received? What do we do with the favor we've received? If we see it as something to be hoarded, protected, fought for, removed from others, then we're going down this path that the disciples were taking. That's not what God calls us to. And yet there's this piece of us that enjoys the privilege of sitting in places of honor. And Jesus acknowledged to the disciples, this is how the world works. He knew it was how it worked. He said, you see it, don't you? How the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, how their high officials exercise authority over them. Society is structured like this big old pyramid, and the people at the top get more honor and more favor and more privilege, and everyone is scrambling to push to the top to just acquire a little bit more for themselves. You see it, don't you? And then Jesus said to the disciples, not so among you. Not so among you. This is not the way my kingdom, God's kingdom, will be built. No, in God's kingdom, whoever wants to become great must become a servant. And whoever wants to be the first must be the slave of all. For even the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. I think that last line is so crucial, that Jesus holds himself up as the example of the servant of all. Because remember, Jesus is the firstborn son, which isn't just a statement of birth order. He was before all of us. He was before creation, which means that all authority, all honor, all power is his. Everything belongs to Jesus. He's the firstborn. But look what our true older brother did. He emptied himself. He didn't hold on to that privilege and honor, but instead, he became born in human form. And where was he born? In a lowly manger. And in the time he spent on this earth, he didn't acquire wealth or property. He didn't build a palace for himself. He lived with nothing. And he was obedient even unto death. He went to the cross and died. Why? To share his inheritance with us, so that we might be forgiven, so that we might know the favor of God, so that we might know that we are seen, loved, valued, that we might know, as Fran and Cheryl and Craig were singing, that we are children of love. That's what our God, our Savior, did for us. Just let that sink in. You're favored. You're chosen. You're loved and created by God for who you are. We don't have to compete for favor. We are set free from that endless competition we see in the world. We're already loved and favored. We're already co-heirs with Christ of an inheritance far beyond any imagination. It's so rich, so wonderful. We don't have to compete for God's favor anymore. Instead, God calls us to a new mission, to share with others the favor we've already received, especially to share that favor with those who are least favored, least seen in the world around us. I don't know if any of you watch The Pit. It's a new show on HBO Max. It's if you've never seen it, it's each season follows a single shift in kind of the life of an emergency department in Pittsburgh. And this season, each episode is 1 hour of that shift, I should add. So this season, in the first episode, we're introduced to a character called Mr. Digby, who is a homeless person off the street. And Mr. Digby is so covered in grime, he stinks so bad that all the people in the waiting room, who've been waiting for who knows how many hours, they're like, take this guy back. Let him skip ahead in line because he stinks so bad we can't stand to be around him. And the nurses and the doctors who immediately begin caring for him are all gagging because he's dirty. He's unwashed. He's unclean. He has a broken arm that needs tending. It's in a cast, but the cast, who knows how long that cast has been on there. It's grimy and dirty. And when the surgeons cut it open, underneath there's maggots in the skin. But the charge nurse, Dana, treats Mr. Digby with honor. She treats him with dignity. And over the course of, we're not even through the whole season yet, but just in the few hours that we've seen of the Pitt season so far, it's been interesting to watch how Mr. Digby has come alive. The way a person responds when they get just a modicum of love and grace and understanding and kindness. And I think this is why Jesus took a small child and placed him among the disciples. This is Mark's version of the Gospel of Matthew, the least of these. As you've done it to the least of these, you've done it to me. Jesus says, as you welcome this child, so you welcome me. I just noticed in the story, in this child, there's no mention of a parent nearby. No one who's kind of watching over. The implication, I think, is that this child might just be a child of the street. Someone who's dirty, an orphan, someone overlooked, doesn't belong to anyone, unseen. And Jesus says, when you welcome a child like this, and you treat them with love and dignity and honor, so you welcome me. There's something that happens when we elevate the least of these in a church. All the differences that exist between us, they cease to matter when we get focused on the mission, the drive that God has given us. Our need, our concern about our own glory and our own importance, it disappears when we're focused on giving others dignity and kindness and love. To take this back to conflict, which is what we've been talking about this whole time in the season of Lent, I think when we are in conflict with each other, a lot of times the conflict isn't just about who's right or who's wrong. That's what's happening on the surface. But underneath the surface, there's a deeper need. A need to be seen. A need to be honored. A need to be respected. A need that we all share for favor. And if we can respond to that need, even in our disagreement, something happens, that conflict, it can begin to melt. On the flip side, though, there is no greater accelerant to conflict than when we treat another person with disrespect, right? Because we can't work out our differences. We can't see each other if we sense that we're being dismissed, if we sense that we're being disrespected, discarded, treated without favor, without honor. And so the principle, I think, for the day that I want you to remember is this, is that we are called to practice the self-emptying of Christ. To not be concerned with competing for favor and honor, position with God. To not see our privilege or our entitlement as something to be hoarded. Jesus didn't consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing. He emptied himself, and he calls us to do the same. To take the position of a servant. To willingly become the least of these, so that we might serve the least of these, so that we might put others' needs, even their need for favor, above our own. And when we do this, when we make this choice, when we walk this path of sacrifice and service, the promise is that the Father's honor and favor is already among us, already upon us. And one day we'll get to hear the words that we're all deeply yearning for. Well done. Well done, thy good and faithful servant. So we're going to have a time of communion together as we've done throughout the season of Lent. Before we receive communion, we're going to take a moment, and I just want to invite you into a time of reflection and prayer and confession. And perhaps a place to reflect this morning is any place where you have felt yourself in competition with another. Any place where you've been feeling this need to kind of push ahead for honor, to be heard. What would it look like to surrender that fight? What would it look like to just rest in the favor of God? And instead of trying to compete, to imagine, how can I show God's love, God's favor to this person? Let us go before God now in a time of reflection and prayer.